Star Wars is standing at a crossroads right now. Not just creatively, not just financially, but philosophically. And for the first time in decades, the franchise has to decide what it actually is. Is Star Wars meant to be a grounded political thriller, a gritty rebellion drama, a hyper realistic sci-fi universe that treats the Force like a myth fading into history? Or is Star Wars still supposed to be space fantasy? Because here's the uncomfortable truth: Star Wars can survive some realism, but it cannot survive becoming realistic. And if it does, it risks falling into the same exact trap that is nearly suffocating another legendary franchise, and that is the Batman. Welcome to the Loreverse. It's your boy Steve Hayes, and today we are going to talk about why Star Wars needs to return to space fantasy. And this topic was triggered by when I was watching John Campia's show. One of the things that he talked about was how he thinks that Dave is too obsessed with the George Lucas Star Wars and how he needs to take us into something better. And while I do agree, Dave Filoni needs to take us into a future to some sort. I do think that they need to focus on space fantasy, not this Andor type of vibe. This is Stevie at the Loreverse, and let's dive into this. Now, let's get this out of the way immediately. Andor as a project is a masterpiece. It is well written, it is tightly directed, it has weight, tension, and purpose, and it really treats the Empire as a soul crushing bureaucratic machine instead of a group of guys who can't aim. And that's important. Star Wars needed Andor to show the cost of the fight. But here's the key thing that nobody wants to say out loud: Andor only works because it is the exception. And it works because it exists in the silence where the lightsabers used to hum. There's no Jedi, no Sith, and no Force visions. But if Star Wars chases that tone everywhere, the entire franchise collapses under its own seriousness. If you take magic out of the Magic Kingdom, you're just left with a theme park. And Star Wars was never built to be sustained on tax heist and prison breaks alone. And this is the fundamental misunderstanding that keeps happening in regards to Star Wars, because people don't understand Star Wars is not science fiction, and it never was. George Lucas didn't create Star Wars to explore technology or futurism. He created it to explore myth. Star Wars is closer to Lord of the Rings than it is to a Blade Runner. And the Force isn't a power system, it's a spiritual metaphor. Jedi, they're not soldiers, they're monks and knights. Sith aren't political extremists, they're dark wizards. And lightsabers, they aren't weapons of war, but they're like Excalibur in a neon light. And the moment Star Wars starts explaining everything, magic starts to die. And you don't explain how a wand works in Harry Potter, you just show the wonder. And look at what happened to The Dark Knight. Batman didn't fail, but he has boxed himself in. And the obsession with realism turned Gotham into a city that felt like Chicago with a costume problem. And there's no Lazarus pits, no Clayface, and no cosmic threats, and everything had to be believable. And what happened? The stories got darker, right? The world got grayer, and eventually that ceiling was hit. And you can only do so much when everything has to feel real. And Star Wars is on the verge of making the same mistake. If every story has to feel like Andor, and if every conflict has to be grounded in logistics and politics, then the galaxy stops feeling far, far away, and it starts feeling like our world. And nobody goes to Star Wars to see our world. And this is why a lot of fans, when it comes to James Gunn, they are excited for Batman, Brave and the Bold, and why fans are always asking about it, because we are getting a fantastical Batman, because Batman is meant to be in that kind of area of the world. He's not just supposed to be a real realistic hero. And my fear is that Star Wars just throws themselves into this like they've done, where everything is so realistic. And this is where Dave Filoni understands something the realism crowd tends to miss. Think about the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars, and think about the world between worlds in Star Wars Rebels. These aren't sci-fi concepts. These are high concept metaphysical weirdness. The father, the son, and the daughter, they're not aliens. They are living incarnations of the Force. And when Star Wars leans into this, into the cosmic gods, the ancient prophecies, and the idea that the universe has a literal soul, it becomes untouchable. And without the Force, Star Wars is just Halo with worse armor. And the Force is the spine of the universe, and it's the space and space fantasy. And the Empire is only terrifying because we know the dark side is the engine driving it. So Vader isn't just a cyborg general, he's a fallen angel. And if you remove that context, the scale of the universe shrinks to darn near nothing. And this is why the current transition matters so much. Kathleen Kennedy stepping away marks the end of an era defined by caution. It really was an era of risk mitigation, testing tones, trying to please everyone, and in the process losing the North Star. And now we are in the Filoni era, and that changes the conversation entirely because Dave Filoni doesn't treat Star Wars like regular schmegular content. He treats it like biblical theology. He understands that symbols matter. An example, think about the convoy bird that follows Ahsoka, right? Legends, they echo, right? The return of, great Admiral Thrawn and even Anakin in the world between worlds. And the Force is emotional before it's logical. And Ahsoka proved the fantasy is alive because Ahsoka was the turning point. It didn't just reintroduce magic, it embraced it. Ancient witches from another galaxy, right? The great Purgil whales traveling through hyperspace in a literal gateway through time and space. This was Star Wars saying, we are done being small. It showed that you can have a new republic political plot, but it must be overshadowed by the return of an ancient mystical threat. And the challenge now is bringing that animation type of energy into the big screen. And we saw some of that with the Ahsoka show, but I think that Dave could really do this on a larger scale with the right directors and the right team and the right people. Now, movies are where the realism trap is deadliest because audiences expect $200 million films to feel tangible, but Star Wars films shouldn't feel realistic. They should feel mythic. And people fail to understand this. The original trilogy wasn't realistic. It was a fairy tale in space, and the prequels weren't subtle. They were a Shakespearean tragedy with laser swords. And if the next theatrical era dies to ground the Force to make it more digestible for casual fans, it will fail. And the next saga needs to make the Force dangerous again. It needs to be something characters fear, respect, and worship, and is not just like a tool to move freaking rocks. And whether the next saga stars Rey or a new lead, the problem is still the same. Because look, if they try to make Rey a military leader or a political figure, the spark is immediately gone. Because Rey needs to be a seeker, and she needs to be digging into the ancient ruins of the first Jedi Temple. It needs to be encouraging things that shouldn't exist. Because Star Wars needs the unknown. And if we have a map for every planet and a blueprint for every ship, the galaxy's dead. And we need the Star Wars. Like we need those terrifying space ghosts from the Lord. We need the wills. We need the things that remind us that we are small in a massive magical universe. Andor showed us how grounded Star Wars can be. Ahsoka showed us how magical Star Wars should be. Now, the franchise has to choose. If Star Wars leans fully into realism, it will survive, but it will never soar. And it will become just another sci-fi franchise in a crowded market. But if it returns to space fantasy, it becomes timeless again. And with Filoni stepping up, this is really the last chance for Star Wars to remember its DNA. It's not about hard sci-fi. It's not about gritty realism. It's a story about a farm boy, a princess, and a pirate fighting a dark sorcerer in a castle in the stars. And it's about hope, myth, and the power of belief. And that Star Wars is worth fighting for. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Stay crispy, and peace out.